Thank you so much for the introduction. As Michał mentioned, my name is Karolina Iwańska and I'm a lawyer at Panoptykon Foundation. I see all the thumbs up on my face, so it's funny. It's funny kind of feeling to join you here today. I'm very pleased to be here for the second time. I was there in Krakow last year. Perhaps some of you participated in the session with me. Last year I spoke about challenges related to online advertising, and 2 years ago my colleague Katarzyna Szmielewicz spoke about the GDPR and how it can affect the work of developers. So I'm grateful that we get a chance to engage with you also this year. In a way, today's session is a follow-up to our talks from the past 2 years, but it is also a bit different. The first difference is that instead of delivering, a long speech, we would like this to be more of a conversation with you. So I'd like to invite you to take active part in the discussion and share your experiences. Also, please free to, interrupt by raising your hand. I think Michał is taking a look at that. So if you want to intervene in the middle, please free. But there will also be some time after a short intro from me and Kamil. And exactly, that's the second difference, is that I am not alone today, but I am joined by Kamil Grondys, who's a solution architect at Samsung Research, also a PhD candidate in cybersecurity at Warsaw Polytechnic, who is way more of a tech optimist than me, from what I've learned. But we'll see. We'll see where this conversation takes us. And a topic that we bring to the table today is humane tech. So what do we mean by that? In short, we mean technology that works for people rather than exploits them, solutions which genuinely support people in their life and embed values that serve common good. Now, why do we, at least I have a feeling that this is largely not the case at the moment? Well, as users of technology, we are surrounded by apps and services that promise us some sort of hyper-personalization, the fulfillment of our needs, perhaps even the improvement of our lives in terms of how healthy of a lifestyle we lead or what news gets to us. However, these friendly interfaces are often just a camouflage for the real service, one where individuals are treated as commodity and offered to the actual paying customer, sometimes the advertisers, sometimes maybe even a government agency. So how do we make sure that technology embraces and furthers values such as human rights, privacy, mental well-being, equality, freedom, democracy, and so on? All the big words. And there are two ways, I believe. One, of course, or at least it's evident to me because I am a lawyer, is regulation. The desire for technology to be our ally, not our enemy, is increasingly shared by lawmakers and regulators, particularly in Europe, which tends to be somewhat of a trendsetter for other regions. And just to mention a few examples, 2 years ago, my colleague Katarzyna talked about the GDPR, and I'm sure you all heard about this by now, and how this law supports individual autonomy and self-determination. And in more concrete terms, particularly relevant for your daily life, the requirement for our solutions that process personal data to be designed in a way which ensures the highest standard of data protection by default. A second initiative that is, I think, worthy to be mentioned is that in December, the European Commission has announced a big regulatory package aimed at tackling the power of large online platforms that play a more and more crucial role in our economy and also in our in basically our democracy. And this package is under the name of Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. These new rules aim to protect users' rights vis-à-vis online platforms, but also foster choice and competition. So, for example, they will address the problem of arbitrary blocking of content, that has recently been on the headlines of with, for example, the blocking of Donald Trump. They will require platforms to provide transparency for how they target ads or recommend and personalized content to people. They will also introduce specific prohibitions for the biggest tech corporations in terms of how they can behave towards their competitors. For example, there will be a requirement to enable competitors to interoperate with platforms' own solutions that has quite a revolutionary potential. And third and final initiative that I want to mention today is the expected regulation of AI, particularly when it is applied in high-risk areas such as healthcare. There are ongoing debates on how to make AI systems accountable and how to evaluate the social impact of AI systems and where we need regulatory interventions. So that's the first way of making tech a bit more humane. The second way is to essentially design technology in a way that embeds these values. And I know all these words like well-being, human rights, and so on are very big. And one could say, what does code have to do with freedom or democracy? Thing is that often code is law, as the American lawyer and writer Lawrence Lessig put it already 20 years ago, meaning that technical means take part in regulating contacts and behaviors and shaping individual or societal outcomes. So is there a way in which developers of tech solutions can make sure that these solutions are genuinely humane, or do we have to actually only rely on regulators? Is it irreconcilable? And so here I'd like to give my mic to Kamil. Could you share some insights about that from your experiences?
Thank you, Karolina. Welcome to our speech. I'm very glad to be here. I'm here for the first time. For me, it's I think it's a very first event when which I'm doing online. So I wish we could sit together each other and be in a single room. Unfortunately, we can only use cameras and microphones. And I think the topic is very important and how we develop technology while being still human-friendly, to respect privacy, and to protect data that we are sharing. So it's like a good example. Currently, we are using camera, we are using microphone, and a lot of data is coming out of our devices to some cloud, and it's being shared. And this is a case when this is according to design. It's according to a plan. But the question was actually how we can develop technology to respect those values. And from my personal perspective, through all those years, I think there are two sides of that story. The dark side and the better side. And on a dark side, I'm actually fighting with that dark side. I'm on a cybersecurity side. So we do a lot of encryption. We do hardware encryption. We do like hundreds of mechanisms just to protect data, just to find vulnerabilities, just to avoid exploits, and how to make a platform that is being used to be secure for common people. Although there is also a very important ingredient when it comes to security. It's awareness of the user and how they manage their privacy and how they manage how they actually share data. So just at the beginning of the conference, I had to allow my browser to access microphone, to access camera, and I had a very good user experience. So a dialogue was shown to me, and it was explaining that, okay, in order to participate in a conference, we need access to your microphone just to record your voice in case you want to tell something. And this is I believe, the way how developers, how engineers, or big companies, small companies can address all those issues. Be friendly to our users, be friendly to anyone who wants to use our technology. And these days, I mean, we produce terabytes of data every second, and it's amazing how much is it, and what we are actually doing with it. So, I think now, today, we are in good times in terms of privacy, in terms of security, and it's like now the platform, the operating system, it's providing us such possibilities. So it's totally different like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I remember those stickers on cameras just to protect our privacy. I don't know what was the recipe for microphone, just unplug it somehow from the motherboard. But I think now, at least I see, the light next to my camera, and I'm fully aware that whatever my camera is now registering is being shared. And the same goes for the microphone and how the design of operating system looks like today. And the user experience, which is currently being up-leveled comparing to what happened just maybe 2 years or a year ago. I don't know what are you thinking about privacy and how everything has changed?
Indeed, but also let me ask you a kind of provocative question that I wanted to ask, but it also appeared in the chat. What about the tension, between the willingness, design, for developers to design all these, friendly interfaces to be ethical with how data is used, and the kind of business model that is designed by definition to exploit personal data. Is it like an irreconcilable thing? Like, can developers do something about this? Or I would also be very curious to hear from our listeners about their experiences in that. But first, Kamil, maybe you could share something.
So again, black side and the other side, and just one name of an employee who just become, I think, the number one whistleblower, who revealed a lot of information about NSA and how some secrets are being gathered, and talked about hundreds of projects about gathering data, processing data. I'm quite sure you know that name. I'm talking about Edward Snowden. And he also mentioned about the way how we can protect our privacy. So, for example, a Tor network, it's somehow scary because it's a deep web, and maybe some people are afraid to go there. But if we want to respect our privacy, we can use the technology in our advantage. So, first of all, we are deciding what we are doing, so we can. I don't want to be radical and tell, okay, just switch the employer, work for someone else. But I think we are in a good community. We have a lot of people who are actually taking care about the values, and I think these days companies, they are talking a lot about the values. And as a developer or engineer who is seeing that those values are not being respected, again, we can do something about it. I think, Karolina, you have a very good example about engineers who just gather and make some kind of protest because of they didn't want to work in some particular special project.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, that, perhaps, as a developer working for a tech company, like a large tech company whose business model is based on, exploiting personal data, it doesn't mean that, there is nothing you can do. I mean, there are illustrations of how employees unite in order to influence the policy of the company. And exactly I think one of the successful examples of this was when, employees of Google, got together and kind of blocked Google's involvement with developing spy drones for the Pentagon. And, Google dropped this project because, thousands of people protested against it. So perhaps saying that, as a developer, you don't really have any kind of influence, any power, perhaps a single employer, maybe not. Maybe it will be the case of again, with the same company, with Google, they recently fired an AI researcher, Timur Gebru, who was, criticizing Google's approach to AI ethics, and she was fired in a kind of unpleasant way. So maybe but she received enormous support from people who remain at Google, and I think that Google will still kind of have to deal with the consequences of like firing her and like that awful PR that they got from it. And I think this is a sign that maybe something is changing also within the companies, that actually making decisions of shutting employees up, can actually bring you bad press. So this is, I think, something that is really a great example. I think there is also from what we work with, when we work with technical experts, they mention there is more and more emphasis on ethics or during computer science conferences, for example, or exactly as somebody mentioned in the chat, there's a discussion going on. I hope you're going to unmute yourself at some point and join us just by, or raise your hand. Please feel free if you want to take the stage. But exactly, Luis writes, we engineers usually think, can I do this? But probably not often enough, should I do this? And it's not me to judge, because I'm not an engineer. I don't know what happens in the behind the closed doors, but that's a good point. And I also think that there is a big kind of movement also to introduce ethics or some sort of law, elements of law into actually curriculums at universities. So I think these are all kind of birds of change that we see, where if we meet in a year, perhaps again, if Lambda invites us again, if you're not fed up with us, we might talk about it in a completely different light. But I'd be really, really curious to hear about your experiences and perhaps any questions you might have. I'm talking to our listeners and watchers, because I'm also curious about the approach of the businesses where you work or of the clients, whether this is a topic even, or whether this is just a flight of fantasy that we're talking about here. Oh, you should design your technology in a way that protects privacy or other values. Do you, in your work, for example, if you look at 5 years ago, 10 years ago or something, if you're very experienced, do you see a change in this regard? Or is this still something, that we really have to work on?
I would like to jump in, but I also would like to encourage our audience to start raising hands. I can see questions were posted. Now, those authors of the questions, can you please raise your hand? This is the only way I can give you a mic. Before I jump there, I wanted to make a comment. So a few years ago, when we got your first keynote speech from Panoptykon about GDPR, I think it was an eye-opener for many of us. There was hundreds of developers sitting in the audience. And I remember that for about an hour after, people were still queuing there to continue asking questions and follow up on some questions, because quite often developers were a bit confused. So how is it that we can check whether certain libraries that we use will breach or not GDPR? To what extent we should actually review and audit all the software dependencies that we include in our projects? And what I'm trying to say here is that I think a lot has changed since then. We are more aware where we can have impact, but it's still a little bit of on an unknown territory for developers. How much of an impact we have long-term, making a decision, small decision here or there about how we store data. So this was very eye-opening, and thank you, Panoptykon, for publishing a good blog post after the conference some few years ago, which addressed many of the questions that were raised there. All right, we have already John on the stage. I will hand over to him.
Yes, hello. So I'm going to continue in the same vein. So I'm very much like engineering solutions to problems. And if we take GDPR, for example, then I know if I'm building an app, GDPR may say there are things I can do and things I can't do. But which exactly is which, and how I know when I'm doing something that I ought not to, that I'm a bit hazier about. So what I'm wondering is there how automatizable is this? Is it possible that there could be a tool running when I check my code in that will give me an error message if I've done something that I ought not to, or is that just a pipe dream? Obviously, for some ethical questions, that's going to be very difficult, but maybe for GDPR that is more formalized, it might be possible. So what's the state of the art there?
I'm not aware of any technical solutions that do that. I don't know, Kamil, if you are. I wonder, I would say that for some aspects of the GDPR, that would certainly be possible. For instance, like when you have one of the key parts of the GDPR is that you have to inform people about how their data is processed, and there is like a list of stuff that has to be, included. So I could imagine that the tool would, be sort of like a checklist that, oh, did you do that? Did you do that? Did you do that? But at the same time, even though, as you said, GDPR is more formalized, it is still I don't know if you're aware of to what the name, the shortcut GDPR, what's the full name? It's a General Data Protection Regulation, and the word general is actually quite key here, because it's, despite the fact that it's a kind of piece of law that is supposed to be, as good pieces of law are quite clear, they shouldn't require a lot of guessing. Still, because of the fact that this particular piece of legislation has been designed to provide some sort of general principles for how data should be protected and processed, and what sort of obligations should there be, I would say that such a tool is quite will be very difficult. Another reason for that is that GDPR is a risk-based supports a risk-based approach. So there is no one-size-fits-all. If you're Facebook, you're going to have to apply different kind of procedures, and different. You will apply different solutions than, let's say, a very small, like an organization like Panoptykon that just wants to stay away from personal data normally, and we process data of like people who sign up to our newsletter, but as far as I know, there is an automated tool for exactly this, actually, for risk assessment. I don't know whether there is something for developers, actually, that checks the code. Oh, is the code GDPR compliant? I imagine that would be very difficult, and my only solution to this would actually be on the kind of organizational level of the company, or like the organization, to make sure that there is someone with this type of knowledge, maybe with someone who also has the legal knowledge but also the technical knowledge. There are people like that. They're quite expensive, but there exist people like that who could be part of the developing process. And I actually think this is a good standard, and this is definitely something that I don't think it's like expecting developers to know the law that is actually quite complex, and like all the kind of judgments around it and decisions. It's too much. But if there was somebody who could be available to you in part of the development process, that could be great. But of course, it's up to the company. I don't know, Kamil, if you had something to add here.
Oh, sorry. No, go
No,
on.
please go ahead. I'll continue after you.
It sounds as though you're saying that if I take a simple question, did I follow the GDPR or not? There's no clear answer, because it depends on the risk assessment. Reasonable people might perhaps take different views. Maybe it can only be answered in court at the end of the day. That's what you're saying?
That's very likely, I'm afraid.
Oh dear.
Yeah, there is but at the same time, I do not believe that, particularly when we have, when this, GDPR is a piece of law that applies in all European countries directly. So that means that we don't have to adopt national laws to implement it. It just applies directly as it is, and making law in European Union, this is a very complex process. Actually, adopting the GDPR took 6 years, from the beginning. 6 years from when even the idea of making it arised until the final text. So essentially, laws, have to be created for a foreseeable future. They cannot apply to a very small kind of part of reality or the universe. They have to be applicable to, we don't know what's going to happen with technology in 10 years, and the GDPR should still be, should still apply. That's why it's so general, and that's why it needs to be made more specific. But maybe, there could be some companies. I could imagine, somebody providing, and actually that would be probably a pretty good business model. I mean, I could imagine many customers being interested in it, exactly in kind of providing some sort of up-to-date knowledge about, what is legal under GDPR in different contexts, what is not, and maybe somehow trying to automating it. So, I think you might have just given some people some business ideas.
Okay, so let me also share my perspective. I think I have even more than one perspective to share. As an engineer who struggled to create a code which is GDPR compliant, I have a support. I mean, I think we engineers, we have already found a solution for that. We call it, for example, code review. We have, open source. We have a community which can address such issues, and that would be one perspective. Another perspective is for some of those general requirements. They are already well-known appliance. For example, how securely store a password. I think everyone here can tell. Okay, it must be hashed. It must be salted, and this is like a standard. And every engineer, if he doesn't know, he know where to look for it. And those standards, they are basically a good practices that we can share. We can copy and paste, and at least we can fill some of those checkboxes regarding GDPR. In data science, the data acquisition, this is also very important, and I think this is very well not documented, but regulated. It's very well regulated. From where we can get those data, from where we can purchase those data, how we can collect those data. So at least at that layer, this is very specifically regulated. And also here in Europe, as well as in the United States, and even in China, there are very some strict regulations about data crossing boundaries. I know it's difficult because we have internet which has no borders, but at least on a paper there are some regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another guest that I will now invite. Thank you, John. Manuel.
Hi. So one thing that I notice again and again is that those people who make the laws, they are often not the best people to understand all of the new technology. Well, new. I mean, collecting data is not that new, but still, it seems like. Well, you said it yourself that the process for GDPR took a long time, and I'm actually impressed that this happened at all. And how can we advise lawmakers to make good laws that actually represent the technical realities?
That's a really good question. At least this is essentially what Panoptykon is trying to do in our daily work. We engage with policymakers, both in Poland, where we are based, but also on the EU level. And exactly, we are trying to feed them with good ideas and support ideas that are good. The problem is that. Actually, I do have data for this because I was researching that before our talk. my point is that, the number of NGOs or human rights organizations that take part, for example, in the political process is, so much smaller than the number of business lobbyists. And actually, in Brussels, so where these laws are adopted, there are 82,000 registered business lobbyists and 11,000 other lobbyists, including academics, NGOs, and so on. So that the proportion is, the disproportion actually is quite significant. But I would say support NGOs. That's a good start. But also, all EU citizens, they can take part in consultations themselves as individuals if they want to. So if there is a topic that you are interested in particular, and you see that the EU or your national government or local government, is running a consultation on something, this is also not restricted to only those who have registered as lobbyists. Every citizen can do that too. And as far as I know, the European Commission, at least, they read everything. I mean, at least they do that, very often these consultations are also designed as forms that you fill. So you just can, choose A, B, C, or D, and so on. So there's even no need to produce something elaborate. You can only just have your say in this way. So if you want to, engage more directly, this is also an option.
NGOs even allow you to pre-fill these forms with some pre-made opinions. If you trust those NGOs, then exactly. Particularly that we are Panoptykon, but also the EDRI, European Digital Rights Initiative, that we are members of, that is based in Brussels. They are mostly active in Brussels. We try to be very transparent in what we do, and where we get our money from, what our positions are, and we also listen to people and also verify various positions. What I see and what I think is a good sign is that, particularly now, because I mentioned to you in my introduction that there is this new huge regulatory package in the EU on platform regulation, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, and basically the European Commission has just announced the text of the law, and now what happens is that the European Parliament and the national governments are going to look at it and come up to their own positions. And then at the end, they will all gather together in something called a trialogue, where they just sit at a table and they come up with a compromise version between the three institutions. And the actual, text from the Commission is actually pretty good in a sense that they really listened to what organizations and academics have been telling them about the problems with platform power. And a lot of that is reflected in the text of the law. So to me, it's a sign that, we are starting to, maybe we haven't won the war yet, but we are starting to win some battles. And I think the tide is changing. I think if we were now talking about the GDPR after all the kind of scandals that happened over the last couple of years, maybe it would be a different conversation. So I'm quite optimistic that it will only get better in terms of regulations, but then also, to put some salt into this, we have to apply these regulations. And this is the story with the GDPR, actually, that is on its own, it's a good law, but it's just not enforced. And, and that is a problem that even the European Union cannot really handle. Like recently, in like some kind of call I had with members of cabinet of Commissioner Jourova, who is a commissioner for transparency and justice and that sort of stuff. They kind of agreed that they don't really see hope that enforcement of the GDPR will massively improve in a couple of years. So even if the Commission says that is a bit worrying. So that's another thing, but. In general, I think that there are ways to engage directly and indirectly via NGOs, for instance. There are really many NGOs in basically every European country
that deal with digital issues. EDRI has over 40 members from all member states. So I'm sure if you are based in Europe, then I'm sure there is an NGO in your country that you could support. But also feel free to support Panoptykon. Also, that'd be nice. but I think it's going for the better. I'm hopeful, at least. And thank you for this question.
Thank you. We have also Luis who would like to join us here on the stage. Let me hand over. Something happened. Luis didn't appear on the stage. Luis, if you could try to raise your hand again. And in the meantime, I will hand over mic to our another guest.
Hi there. Thanks for this opportunity. And you asked about experiences in GDPR and such. And at least in my industry, we don't cater directly to end users, but I noticed that our customers who do, they are much more aware about privacy. And that's probably because GDPR is in the news and it's talked about. And they demand it basically. So we have to deal with it as well as a supplier. And like Kamil said, what we do is pretty process-based at the moment, code reviews, as well as a lot of documentation, which has an interesting side effect that I'd rather not use some private data, because then I have to explain why I do it, what's the retention time, all sorts of things. So that pushes us kind of automatically towards thinking about different ways to, for example, solve support. Like, how do I connect, a fault case to the logs and stuff like that. So that's one thing. And the other is what John asked about automatization. I think if there's a clear separation about where you store such data and how you get it, like you have defined APIs towards identity providers, for example, then it should be possible to trace the path of the data, and it should be possible to kind of track down how it is being used. Obviously, I don't know about the details, but it feels like we have the information, we just don't use it. And I actually had a question to you as well, because you Karolina, has mentioned AI, and what is, how is it different from any other technology that is, about processing a lot of data? Why did you mention it specifically? Is there some new threat to privacy due to that, or how does that work? Thank you.
I think that the kind of the policy proposals around it at the EU level deal with the problem that GDPR is related to personal data, and not all data is personal. And AI systems, they often operate on statistical correlations, for instance. So you can't always pin the data to the person, to an individual, and this is a requirement from the GDPR, that you can actually identify somebody to whom the data relates, or to single out somebody from a crowd of people, and that this is the person to the data relates. In AI, it might be the case, and there the GDPR will apply, but it also might not be the case, particularly when we talk about big data, particularly when we talk about statistical correlations, when we talk about machine learning, where data is made anonymous but still is used and still can have not only individual consequences. So, for example, a decision is made about me, about whether I get a loan, about whether I get accepted to school. And there the GDPR would apply because it's about me. But there are also some wider societal consequences of AI systems, like, how much time as society we spend in front of screens, for example, that maximize our attention, or kind of disinformation aspect of it that is also widely discussed at the moment, kind of how diverse news do we see in our newsfeed, and so on and so forth. And I suppose that this is the motivation for looking at AI systems, because they are still slightly different from just data protection law that just relates to data, personal data. And these new regulations, they are going to adopt, look more at the process of developing AI. For example, on what data has it been trained? Is this data set not biased? It's going to look at more, also at other consequences that just breaches of privacy. And I think this is the motivation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's try to invite Luis now. We'll see. Let's see if this works. Okay, Luis.
So can you hear me? And can you see me? I don't see my face in this screen.
We see your picture. We can more or less imagine.
Okay. Yeah, pretty much the same, just longer hair. First, a little comment about the message I sent in the chat a little earlier. Yeah, we engineers sometimes get very excited about new technology. So we usually get like the attitude is more like hands-on, the fancy new things, and how challenging it is and how exciting it is to get things done. And it's not too common for us to actually think whether it's good or not. I mean, we want it to be good because it's like we are good people but it's not like we stop to think what are the consequences of this, and not just about privacy or ethical issues. It also happens, for instance, with this huge movement towards the cloud. We don't ever stop to think, is the cloud provider energy efficient, for instance? And that kind of thing is just not a part of our thinking scheme. So I think we do have a gap there that we should address as the industry as a whole, I guess. But also the question I had in the Q&A section is how do we get this conversation to like the general audience, like the common people that's perhaps not aware of all that it's at stake actually. Because, well, technology does make our lives better sometimes, most of the times actually. So it's like for most people it's like a very good trade-off. Just give up everything. I'm fine. I'm not hiding anything, for instance. So just give me the benefits of it.
Well, my standard answer, and then Kamil, maybe you can also show your perspective from like a cybersecurity expert point of view. But my answer is, now we see you. My standard answer normally to the argument that you have nothing to hide is that it's not about really, it's not, as you say, like it's not about hiding people to know about you and what you don't want to know, what you don't want them to know. And I'm not only talking about your friends or your family or whatever, but also the companies that use your data. And I would say that from our experience, at least, when people actually a lot of people are not aware of the fact of what is going on in the backstage. They are not aware of the fact, for instance, that their data is constantly being observed and analyzed and profiled and used for targeted advertising, for showing everybody a different news feed, or for any sort of reason like that. To hide not in a sense that we did something illegal, but just in a sense that this is This is our information. This is our life, our intimacy, something that maybe we wouldn't be so ready to share with somebody. And, you know, we don't sometimes realize how this data can be used. And that's another aspect, because, you know, we might think that, you know, okay, it's okay for other people to know something, but then what if the same kind of data is leaked to a prospective employer, for instance, who can look at our data and see what we do? Or if our fresh example from Poland, actually, you know, there is a proposal that the Social Security Agency in Poland would be able to look at people's news feeds and gather information from Facebook and Google and all our platforms about whether people were at the place where they said they would be, so that they don't take some illness benefits, for instance, and lie, and instead go on holidays. So, you know, the same kind of data that we share with friends, like pictures from the Caribbean or something. I mean, before COVID. Now I don't know, just from the balcony or something. You know, that could be used for reasons that we wouldn't anticipate when sharing that. So from our experience, at least, once we make people aware of these nuances, they react in a very different way. But I'm sure that, you know, Kamil can talk more about like what is even like the, you know, the in terms of like cybersecurity and kind of protecting this data. Are they really all that secure?
So once I was doing a study, because your original question was how to make those topics to be more attractive to common people, to get some publicity around it. And I think, and I believe strongly that currently it's getting better and better. I mean, once I've done some studies, I was just checking the Google Trends for some of the names of vulnerabilities. And I've looked at Meltdown, at Spectre, at the Blueborn, Heartbleed. And I was actually surprised how those names are getting to the headlines of some big newspapers. And of course, they were saying like 65 billions of Android devices are vulnerable, and be scared. But in reality, it was much smaller. But I think you get my point that nowadays those topics are being attractive, especially when they are broken. I mean, for example, when a company A loses data, it gets a lot of publicity, especially if its name starts with S or A or F or G. you can name it. So that gains a lot of attraction. But I think there is also a place for us engineers, for user experience experts. And I like how it evolved. For example, now on my smartphone, when I, for example, install an application which requires access to my location, I see that friendly message saying that I can now decide either to allow this application only to access the data when it's in the foreground, or don't allow the access to location. And I have also some kind of explanation why this application is actually asking me for such permission.
Yeah, but also most people actually take the feature like as something to save battery, actually, not that much to protect them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, still it's getting closer to the common life.
Every reason is good. Every reason is good. One of the arguments actually that we use against online advertising is that it slows down your browser, because like all these trackers have to load and like whatever. Yeah. And this is like, there is this, you know, browser called Brave, and this is actually in their PR material that our browser is the fastest because you don't have all these like trackers in it. So I mean, this is a good argument, and it, as you say, it can be convincing to some people.
Yeah, yes. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. Piotr also asked the question. Piotr, if you would like to join us on the stage, just please raise your hand. If not, I will read it out. We still have like less than 10 minutes for these questions, so we will probably allow 1 or 2 people to join us here. Okay, I'm going to read out loud. Piotr's question is how realistic it is to accompany all the regulations with a practical explanation for engineers. So something that an engineer can see, and a practical example would, like, I guess, vividly explain what to do, what not to do.
I guess that would be an ideal scenario. I think I would have to look more closely into this, but it seems to me that there are some initiatives like that. They are not perhaps as standardized. I mean, they come maybe from the private sector, and there are maybe just initiatives that happen here and there and don't really cover the whole picture. But I think that there are initiatives like that, but I can't give you examples now. It just rings a bell. At the same time, there is more and more, looking at this from as somebody who follows like how the law on this develops. I see that there is a tendency actually to do something like if you introduce something technical in the law, for example, let's say if we were to make a do not track standard an obligation, a legal requirement for companies to allow people to opt out of tracking. This is not at the moment a legal obligation. That's why it's mostly not applied. Something that we've seen in the GDPR, and GDPR gives us so many lessons in how not to write laws sometimes, because in the GDPR there is actually this provision that says that you can opt out of marketing, for instance, via some kind of automated tools. And then these automated tools are not defined. There is no details on like who decides what is the right standard for these tools, who decides, whether this tool is okay and that one is not okay. And in practice, this is basically a dead provision, like it's not applied. And all it needs is an extra sentence that says, for example, I don't know, European Data Protection Board approves a standard. Right, that's it, and it's basically delegated to another body that is more flexible than lawmakers, than institutions that make laws, that could, have the kind of competence to approve a certain standard. And I think this is a solution that should be more and more adopted. And I think actually that. I keep on coming back to this, but this is a very fresh thing, that this whole package of regulations for online platforms, there are provisions like that. When, for example, risk assessments are introduced in the DSA, there is a provision that says an entity a body within the European Commission has the power to further define what needs to be done, and there is a tendency, I think, to do that more and more. And I hope that it will soon be a very common thing and a reality. Don't know if somebody has something to add.
Maybe I will try, because I'm a bit angry because all of those regulations they are like a bit too late. It's good that they are there, and I'm mad and angry on how most of companies reacted to those regulations. So to some companies, it was like, okay, we are already GDPR compliant, and we don't have anything to worry about. But for some others was, wow, now we need to put a lot of disclaimers, a lot of text saying why we need cookie. And I like this question because it's coming from an engineer, from engineering perspective. So first of all, it's like, for us engineers, it's so deterministic on what some kind of system or component is doing. So for us, it's like, just checking it. Why do you need to send a cookie to end user? You only need to keep a session, or you have something else, or you are using some pixel which is doing some analytics. Maybe it's way better to do the analytics by yourself, or or even another perspective, you got requirements from your customer. He needs A, B, and C. And then as an engineer or an architect, you can respond, okay, we can go with that, but first of all, we need to get a consent from the user of our service, because this is how it needs to be done. And unfortunately, there are no like automated tool which will tell you, but I think there are some red lights. You can spot them at any time. For example, just define what kind of data you acquire and how you acquire that data and how you share that data. And if you want to, put some tracker to the data and see how it travels, I think we engineers, we also have some tools just to monitor our network traffic, what's going in and out from our servers. So that's why I'm angry. We engineers, we should be, I think, a bit better. Take the privacy as the first value, include it in the design of whatever we are doing.
It's always useful to ask yourself the question, why do I need this? What is it for? And this is the number zero question that the GDPR asks, essentially. So, this is actually a very, if you saw it, it's actually a very rational law. Basically, what it asks you to do is to justify why do you need this data. And if you cannot justify it, then you cannot process it. So, this is as simple as that. And, of course, you cannot justify everything. You cannot justify things that are not essentially not fair or not transparent. These are the red lines that the GDPR says. Okay, you can process the data. There's no prohibition, right? GDPR says you can do that. Just make sure you know what is it for, whether you have the legal basis to do that, and you don't always need to have consent, because consent is only one of the 6 possibilities for legal basis that GDPR offers. So consent is really the last resort. So when you, for example, if you want to, the example that you gave, if you want to analyze, I don't know, for example, the efficiency of your communication, if you want to analyze where people go on your website, just for your internal purposes, you don't need consent for this. It's your legitimate interest to know how people interact with your stuff. But when you reach a point when you cannot really justify something by the other legal basis, so it doesn't really serve the contract that I have with this person. No law actually obliges me to use this data. I don't really have such a legitimate interest in this, because people can just opt out of this. Then you consider consent, right? So only then you ask for consent. But again, consent doesn't legitimize everything. So if you want to do really shady stuff with it, even if you have consent, it's not. It can still be illegal. But in general, it's as simple. I think just ask yourself why, or your supervisors. Ask them why.
And it doesn't have to be shady. You can also do it in good faith.
Yeah, I think this is a good closing advice to all of us. Keep asking the question, why do I need, should I? I think this is
it's always good.
It's a practical advice, something that each one of us can do, and it doesn't require any tooling or special software. Thank you, Karolina. Thank you, Kamil, so much for joining us here and provoking this discussion. I think it's important to keep on having this kind of discussions, be aware of the context in which we operate, in which we design and produce software systems.